The sun had just dipped behind a row of suburban houses, casting long shadows across the street. I stepped outside to check the mail, coffee still warm in my hand, when I noticed him. The HOA enforcer was standing by my mailbox, arms crossed, eyes scanning my freshly painted beige mailbox. "Is this the mailbox in violation?" he asked, his voice sharp, almost mocking. I froze. "Violation? I just painted it beige last week." This is what the letter said. He smirked. "Letters can only do so much. Fines, however, are another story." The confrontation escalated quickly. Words were exchanged, voices rising, and neighbors started peeking through windows. My dog barked frantically, sensing the tension. I felt my face flush, anger bubbling inside me. As the argument continued, my mind drifted back to the day the first HOA letter arrived. A plain envelope, stamped with their logo, carrying a message that felt more like a threat than a reminder. It demanded my mailbox be painted beige within 7 days. I had obeyed immediately, bought the paint, spent hours making sure it looked perfect, and yet, here I was being confronted again, a $50 fine already tacked on. The HOA's logic was infuriating. Comply, and still be punished, I thought. I could see my neighbors whispering, some shaking their heads, others giving me sympathetic glances. I remembered the first fine notice in more detail. $50 for failure to comply. Daily fines of $50 may continue until the violation is corrected. The threat of an endless daily penalty made my stomach turn. I had never dealt with anything like this before. It felt like a personal attack. I tried reasoning. I painted it exactly as requested. Checked the color. But reasoning with someone who thrived on power and rules was impossible. The enforcer just shook his head, took out his clipboard, and jotted down notes as if I hadn't even spoken. The tension in the neighborhood escalated over the next few days. Gossip spread faster than wildfire. Some neighbors secretly enjoyed my struggle, whispering about the crazy homeowner fighting the HOA. Others offered quiet support, bringing coffee, checking in on me. I spent nights combing through HOA bylaws, looking for loopholes, anything I could use. My research was frustrating. Every clause seemed to favor the board. The more I read, the more trapped I felt. The fight was becoming bigger than a mailbox. It was about fairness, control, and standing up for what was right. By the end of the week, I received another notice. Another fine, another threat. My family was stressed. Sleepless nights became routine. Every sound outside my window made me jump, fearing another confrontation. And then, the final moment came. I stood again by the mailbox, staring at the beige paint I had applied with care, when a realization hit me. This was only the beginning. The $50 fine was just the first wave in what promised to be a storm that could engulf the entire HOA board. I clenched my fists, took a deep breath, and muttered under my breath. I had no idea this was only the beginning of a battle that would drag the whole board into the spotlight. Days turned into weeks, and the stack of HOA letters on my kitchen counter kept growing. Each envelope carried the same cold, printed message: violations, fines, and threats. The sheer number made my heart race every time the mail arrived. My family felt it too. My spouse avoided checking the mail, hoping it would just go away. The kids were anxious, asking questions I didn't have answers for. Dinner conversations became tense, punctuated by sighs and muttered frustrations. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Every creak of the house in the middle of the night felt like someone knocking to deliver another notice. Neighbors didn't make it easier. Some whispered as they passed by, teasing with smirks about the battle with the HOA. Others gave sympathetic glances, but didn't offer help. I noticed Mrs. Peterson from across the street peeking over her curtains more often than usual, and Mr. James, normally aloof, would nod at me in passing as if to say, "I see you're still fighting." I decided it was time to take action. I started digging through the HOA bylaws, researching online forums, reading legal guides. The more I read, the more absurd the rules seemed. Paint colors, mailbox sizes, shrub heights. Every tiny detail was monitored and policed. The board had built a kingdom of control, and I was now an unwilling subject. Every time a new letter arrived, my frustration grew. Another $50? For what? For following your own rules. I yelled, crumpling the notice into a ball before carefully placing it back on the counter. My neighbors probably thought I had lost it, but I was determined. I refused to let them bully me into submission. I began keeping a log. Dates, letters, fines, interactions with the HOA enforcer. Everything documented, everything noted. The fight was no longer just about my mailbox. It had become a battle for respect, fairness, and the principle that homeowners shouldn't be punished for complying with unreasonable rules. One evening, I received a particularly aggressive letter, the type that was meant to intimidate. Failure to respond will result in further fines. It read, cold and lifeless. I felt a surge of anger and clarity at the same time. Enough was enough. I tucked the violation notice under my arm the next morning and walked straight into the lion's den, the HOA board meeting. The room smelled of polished wood and stale coffee. Board members glanced up from their papers, eyebrows raised, as I approached the podium. All the whispered gossip, sleepless nights, and growing frustration had led to this moment. My voice didn't shake. My eyes met theirs with determination. I was ready, and just as I prepared to lay out my case, a thought crossed my mind. This meeting would change everything. Not just for me, but for every homeowner who had ever been bullied by rules written for the sole purpose of control. I inhaled, feeling the tension wrap around me like a heavy blanket, and muttered to myself, enough was enough. I grabbed the violation notice, tucked it under my arm, and walked straight into the lion's den, the HOA board meeting. The conference room smelled of polished wood and faint coffee, a stark contrast to the tension that hung thick in the air. I stepped inside, violation notice tucked firmly under my arm, and felt every eye on me. The HOA board members were seated like judges, faces unreadable, pens poised over papers. I clear my throat. I'm here to address the repeated fines for my mailbox. My voice, though steady, carried the weight of weeks of frustration, sleepless nights, and simmering anger. A board member, tall and stern, looked up from his notes. You're aware of the violations, correct? He asked. His tone was calm, but edged with authority, the kind that tried to intimidate before any words were spoken. Yes, I said, holding my ground. I complied. I painted the mailbox exactly as the HOA required. And yet, fines keep arriving. A hush fell across the room. Papers rustled. The air felt heavy, charged, like the calm before a storm. I unfolded the notice and read it aloud, line by line. $50 fine. Daily fines may continue. My voice echoed off the walls, each word landing with precise weight. Confusion spread across the faces of the board members. Some whispered to each other. Others scribbled notes, clearly not expecting such a detailed defense. The board manager cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. There may have been a miscommunication, he admitted, voice low, almost reluctant. I could sense the hesitation, the fear that someone had finally noticed the absurdity of their enforcement. I pressed on, carefully laying out the timeline. The first letter, the paint compliance, the repeated fines, the sleepless nights. Each detail painted a vivid picture of the unnecessary struggle they had caused. The room listened, some eyes widening, others narrowing in disbelief. A tense silence followed my last point. The weight of my words seemed to linger, a quiet accusation against the rigid rules they had blindly enforced. I waited, knowing the next move would determine the course of this battle. Just as I thought relief might come, one board member slowly raised a hand. The entire room froze. Every pen halted mid-scribble, every whisper ceased. His hand hovered, and all eyes turned to him. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something in his expression, a mix of curiosity and calculation, made my stomach knot. I realized that whatever he was about to say could change everything. The tension was unbearable. Minutes felt like hours. Every heartbeat echoed in my ears as I braced for the next moment. And then, as if the world had paused for dramatic effect, he opened his mouth. But the words were left unspoken. I clenched my fists, knowing deep down that this single moment would determine not just the fate of my mailbox, but the power of the HOA itself. But just when I thought the nightmare was over, One board member raised their hand, and everything froze. The boardroom fell silent, the kind of silence that made every creak of the chairs sound like thunder. All eyes were on the board member who had raised his hand. Slowly, deliberately, he stood. The room tensed, expecting confrontation. "I think we need to reconsider these fines," he said, voice steady. A ripple went through the board members, some confused, some visibly annoyed. Another member scoffed. "Reconsider? We've been enforcing the rules for months. These fines are standard procedure." "Yes," the first board member replied calmly. "But in this case, the homeowner complied fully. The mailbox is painted exactly as required. The fines are unnecessary." Murmurs spread across the room. Papers shuffled, pens paused mid-note. I sat back slightly, letting the tension build. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the twist that could turn the battle in my favor. The debate escalated. Some argued that rules were rules, that exceptions could set dangerous precedents. Others pointed out the absurdity of punishing someone for following instructions. Each point clashed in the air, a chaotic storm of logic versus authority. Then, suddenly, laughter broke out. Not the malicious kind, but the kind that comes from realizing something ridiculous had been going on all along. One board member, red-faced, shook his head. "We've been arguing over what exactly? The mailbox is beige. There's nothing to argue about." The room erupted. Some members laughed quietly, some more openly. Others just stared, flustered and defeated. The tension that had been suffocating moments ago now gave way to disbelief and amusement. I couldn't help but smile, though I stayed in my seat, keeping my expression calm. Victory felt close, but the final decision still hung in the balance. Finally, the vote was called. One by one, hands went up. The motion to cancel the fines gained momentum, swaying the room. Each vote felt like a small victory, a correction of months of injustice. And then, the last hand went up. Silence fell again as the board chair recorded the final tally. The room collectively held its breath. I sat there, heart pounding, knowing this vote would change everything. Not just for me, but for every homeowner who had ever been subjected to arbitrary rules and endless fines. The chair cleared his throat and spoke, voice heavy with gravity. The vote was cast. I leaned forward, every nerve alert. The room waited. My mailbox, my family, and my sanity hung on the next words. But what they decided would change HOA rules forever. The room exhaled as one. Relief, disbelief, and quiet celebration mingled in the air. The motion had passed. The fines were canceled, every last dollar refunded, and my mailbox, my beige mailbox, was officially pre-approved. I felt my shoulders relax for the first time in weeks. The tension that had weighed me down finally lifted. I looked around the boardroom. Some members were smiling awkwardly, others still recovering from the realization of their overreach. I gathered my things slowly, savoring the moment. The stack of letters that had once caused so much stress now felt like relics of a battle already won. Each envelope, each fine notice, each threat had been a small part of a story that ended with justice and a touch of humor. As I walked out of the building, sunlight streaming through the glass doors, I could hear neighbors greeting me from across the street. Some nodded with admiration, others with playful smirks. I waved, feeling a sense of triumph I hadn't known I would feel in this quiet suburban street. The mailbox, my mailbox, gleamed in the sunlight. Beige, perfect, and untouched by further fines. It symbolized more than just a color. It symbolized fairness, standing up, and finally winning against an authority that had misused its power. I thought back to the sleepless nights, the letters, the tension, and the endless research. Every moment of stress had been worth it. The battle wasn't just about paint. It was about principle, and that victory was sweeter than I could have imagined. As I turned toward home, I smiled. This small victory was proof that persistence mattered. Even the strictest HOA could be held accountable if you stood your ground. I reflected on the journey. The fight at the mailbox, the threat letters, the tense boardroom showdown, and the twist that finally turned the tide. Each step had led to this moment. and I knew I'd never forget the lesson learned. And as I stepped into my home, I couldn't help but think. Sometimes even the most rigid rules could be challenged and justice could prevail. Sometimes even the strictest HOAs can be defeated. If you've ever faced HOA madness, share your story, and don't forget to subscribe for more.